The important thing about this is I'm presenting some information which represents the work of a lot of people. And I won't be able to credit everybody. Oh, and by the way, Rita Teal from Arrowtown, New Zealand says, Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
The Leonard Street Irregulars, for those of you who remember your Sherlock Holmes, are about to present the last stage out of Annisquam. I'm not sure there's going to be enough room, even on one of those stages, for all the people in this room, so we may have to run a couple of trips. This is just a few of the people who have helped. And I might say the guy in the dark glasses on the camera to my left gets most of the credit or most of the blame, because somehow he found a couple of guys from the North Woods to come down and look at our stagecoach, and that triggered this entire investigation. My wife, in the middle of going down the rabbit hole of Annisquam artists, kept coming up with interesting stuff. And Mary Ellen and Jimmy and Stephanie and Fred and a lot of other people have tossed in bits. Second thing is, whatever I'm going to say, even though it's been recorded, don't assume it's necessarily correct. One of the things that we've learned in looking at the old photographs and the old records is an astonishing amount of misinformation written down. And of course, once it's written, or even better, typeset, then it must be true. And I will tell you, it doesn't always true. I did the best I could. For those of you who haven't looked at it next door, we have quite a beast tucked away in the back of that room. I always never paid much attention to it as a kid. It was just something that was always there. It was like the paintings in the village hall. It was our wallpaper. And I think if Steve hadn't been smart enough to get someone to tell us something about it, none of you guys would be sitting here. So if you want to be unhappy, blame him. Stagecoaches evolved more or less in parallel in England and the United States. This is a picture of an early stagecoach in the United States. I want to show you one thing. Look at this lady getting out. The way you got into a stagecoach in the old days was through the front. Most of the seats didn't have backs. And imagine yourself in this dress, if you're of that persuasion, trying to climb in over all these smelly jokers to get in and out of the stagecoach. It got you from point A to point B, but not in much comfort. So something happened. What do we know about the machine next door? Where did it come from? Who manufactured it? Who bought it? Who used it? How the hell did it get in there? I mean, there's almost no clearance. That's not how it got in. They pushed it in. But who got hold of it for us? What's its condition? And what should we do with it? And the answer is, I only know some of these answers, but particularly the last few points, this one here, what should we do with it, is up for grabs and up for discussion. Now, I'm not sure how you found them, Steve, but these two jokers appeared out of the North Woods, and I just happened to meet them coming in. I didn't even get in the building before they had walked over to the stagecoach, opened the door, and pulled out the middle jump seat. If you remember the stagecoach, there are seats facing forward, seats facing backwards, and there's a bench seat in the middle. And the bench seat gets out so you can get people in and out. They walked into the room, opened the door of the stagecoach, and popped up half of the jump seat. Now, what? The stagecoach is 15 feet tall and 20 feet long. You walk in and you pull out the jump seat. What the hell's going on? This is what's going on. Underneath the jump seat, carved into the wood and covered with multiple layers of paint, is the builder's serial number for this machine. And they knew exactly where to look. I was impressed instantly. Next question was, how the hell do you read the serial number? Because it has been painted over about 15 times in the life of the stagecoach. And somebody remembered going to graveyards and trying to read old inscriptions on tombstones that you can't read, or a brass plate in an English church. Found a piece of paper, a pencil, and up comes the number. Right there. And what was the number? Well, it was in Roman numerals. 54. L1, 2, 3, 4, not L1V, L1, 2, 3, 4 ones, which means it's 54, made in the early days of the company in Concord, New Hampshire, that made this kind of coach. We have not heard back, and most of the records for this company do not exist anymore. But the fact that it's in Roman numerals means it was made by this variant of the company, which kept changing its corporate structure. I would surmise that 54 might make it a very early coach. Seems reasonable to me. You don't usually start numbering backwards. But we don't know. And my guess is we may never know. It's worth thinking about. The railroad got to Gloucester in November, if I can cast my mind back that far, 1847, which meant that all of a sudden there was a big demand to get from here to there. There had been stages running, as I will show you, but there were a lot more people needed to go to the depot suddenly. And I'm wondering if the coach, this particular coach, might have been bought about the time that the railway got here. The Abbott Downing Company was a very big deal in New Hampshire. And you can see from this contemporary print, it's a very large company. They made everything from limbers for the Federal Army, to tow behind cannons, to wagons, but their pride and joy was a Concord mail coach. That was the best thing that they made, and you'll see why. This is a rare beast next door. There's some argument about how many true Concord coaches they made, ranging between 1,500 and 3,000, mostly settling around 1,600. People have counted up to 160 that might still exist. This is a message for you, your friends, your grandchildren's friends, anybody else who happens to go into the Hysterical Society. Please don't touch it, climb on it, pat it, pamper it, push it. Just look at it and admire it. We have a 9 inside passenger model, which means 3 facing forward, 3 facing backwards, and 3 people wedged in the middle with their knees with everybody else's knees. And any number of people on top. One of the things that makes our coach interesting is that whoever ordered it what's called Western style, and I'll show you what I mean. But it makes it identifiable in pictures because it's an unusual window configuration for the eastern part of the United States. And the Western configuration was made for rougher roads where big plates of glass would break. So somebody got a bargain or was smart or something, but they had a Western configuration. Now, how many people remember John Wayne's breakthrough movie, Stagecoach? Some people. It made John Wayne from a B actor into an A actor. And here is John Ford in his jodhpurs. The characters in the crooked banker, the whore with a heart of gold, the secretly pregnant wife of a Union Army, Federal Army officer, and the stagecoach. Look, small window here, small window behind John Ford's head, and roll down leather curtains. And when you look at our coach, that's our configuration. It's a Western coach, and many of the pictures you'll see of stagecoaches in New England will have big plate glass windows inside when you're taking the summer folk up into the White Mountains so they can see. This one's different. Why would you buy a Concord coach? I'm going to channel Shelley Berman, for those of you who remember Shelley Berman, and sit on a stool a little bit. I was considering channeling George Burns, but Steve told me I couldn't light a cigar. And I was considering channeling Mark Twain, but I thought that would be presumptuous, and I would have had to light a cigar. So, the reasons you buy a Concord coach, and it went all around the world. Comfort. Coaches up until this time have rigid or semi-rigid metal springs, and if you had any early fillings, the stagecoach would dislodge them. What they did was they slung the body of the stagecoach on leather strapping, so the body of the coach swayed. It could go sideways some, but it could go back and forth, and it made it a comfortable vehicle. Its success testifies to the fact that it was very different, because anybody who has been in Australia or New Zealand or South Africa, former parts of the English Empire, would know that the people in those countries, if they had any chance, they would have bought an English coach or copied an English coach, because English things were the best, but they didn't. This coach style, its ride, everything else swept away Anglophilia. And the Australians recognized that the early stagecoach lines, which ran up into the 1920s, were such an important part of Australia history that they issued a commemorative stamp. Now, not every coach in Australia was made in Concord, New Hampshire, but a surprisingly large number of them were. They set up factories to make knockoffs, of course, because that's what you do. But there were plenty of coaches in Australia, some of which probably went from the gold rush in California to the gold rush in Victoria in Australia. And I know, we even know the guy's name, some of the coaches that were in Australia came back across the Tasman for the gold rush in New Zealand. These were well-traveled vehicles in more ways than one. And thanks to my member of the Leonard Street Irregulars resident in Arrowtown, New Zealand, we came up with a photograph of a Concord coach in, what's wrong with the button, in Clyde, New Zealand in the mid-1860s, which was the time, the peak of our local gold rush in New Zealand. And this is a real, honest-to-God Concord coach. Look at the little window. The little window, the roll-down curtains, the fancy painting on the door. The Concord Coach Company had employees' only job was to paint an ornamental painting on the door. And the customer could request what that painting would be. It might be Mount Washington. It might be somewhere out in Colorado. But they delivered what you wanted. And they photographed every single coach they built. And would I like to find that photo library? It was such an important part of our westward expansion in the United States that the Concord coach became and is still an icon for the Wells Fargo Bank. And for those of you who are in the very back of the room where you may be able to hear me, but you're sure as hell not going to be able to read the label, this is a shipment of 30 Concord coaches on one freight train headed from Concord, New Hampshire to Omaha, Nebraska by order of the Wells Fargo Bank. 1 year before they completed the Transcontinental Railroad. So when you complete the Transcontinental Railroad, all of a sudden you've opened up 2,500 miles of the United States, and you need feeder lines off the train. And what better way to a feeder line than a Concord coach? When the Concord Coach Company, the Abbott Downing Company, finally went bankrupt, Wells Fargo bought the corporate name, and they own it. And it has become a symbol of our West. So if I do this, to those in the back of the room, you'll understand why I get so excited about a stagecoach. And here we are. This isn't going to Riverdale or Lanesville. The trees are wrong. And the guy up on the box is carrying a sawed-off 10-gauge shotgun to repel Lyme disease ticks. I don't know. Whatever it is you want to keep away. So, take off my hat. I found today, or yesterday, with Betsy Horowitz's help, a roll for the Leonard School. And I'm actually going somewhere with this. I found a roll for the Leonard School of 1889 to 1890, listing all of the children who were enrolled. There were 67 names on it. This is in 1889. And of course, by this time, Annisquam was a place in decline. So the concept of having multiple stage lines servicing Annisquam is not odd at all. We had 2 coal pockets, or 2 coal docks, serving our tiny little village. One down here by the bridge, and one out by the yacht club. And they were both derelict by 1890. The yacht club had been derelict for a very long time. This was a very busy place, as you all know. So we had 5 companies at least on Cape Ann. The one we're most interested in is the Chard Brothers, who sold to Cunningham. Wait, I'll tell you who. Not here, or at least not directly here. Pierce to Griffin, and that's our coach across the alleyway. Competition was a man named Stuart Colby, who sold out to somebody named Harvey. And then in Lanesville, you had another group of Harveys. There is almost as many Harveys on Cape Ann as there are Natties. And there was, oh, incidentally, there was a stagecoach line that served Essex, and there was one that served East Gloucester, but we're not going to really pay much attention to these 3 because, as we know, living in Annisquam, they don't matter much. So, our first one, and that's our coach one, was started by Ezekiel and William Chard in 1819. It's very early for stagecoach business. And the Chards owned most of the land down the hill here, out towards Chester Square. And if you look at the maps, I'll show you, there was a Chard here and a Chard there, and there's almost as many Chards as there were Harveys. So they ran it until 1860, and someone named James A. Cunningham bought it. And I did inquire from some of the people sitting in the audience how much they knew about James A. Cunningham, and I didn't get much information suggesting that they were closely related, but I'm perfectly willing to be corrected. John Pierce was the next owner. I know nothing about John and would like to know. And finally, the stage ended up in the hands of Orrin, O-R-I-N, E. Griffin, and his son, James E. Griffin. I thought, well, that's interesting. Who is James A. Cunningham, since the Cunninghams didn't know? And James A. Cunningham was quite a character. He was born in Boston, and he married Ann Lane, who happened to be the daughter of the big sea captain who lives up on Arlington Street, and the brother of the guy that built my house, Ann. And when the Civil War broke out, he stopped running the stagecoach and joined up with a volunteer regiment, a volunteer infantry regiment, which went through virtually every major Civil War battle that you ever read about involving Grant and the eastern part of the Civil War. And he ended up as brevet major general, which means he had a temporary rank of brigadier general, although he was legally a colonel. He was with Grant at the surrender, went out to meet a Confederate officer carrying the flag of truce to talk about it. Came back here, he became the adjutant general of Massachusetts, ran the old soldiers' home in Chelsea. He was the father of Charles, my favorite Annisquam guy, who ran the post office, who said to the lady from Cambridge, New York, Brookline, Dedham, Weston, one of those places she said to him, "Well, Mr. Cunningham, aren't you glad to see the summer folk arrive?" And he said, "Well, yes, I am, but I'm damn glad to see them go." Whereupon she or somebody else said, "Well, Mr. Cunningham, I assume that during the winter you just close the post office. There's no need for it." He said, "You're right. The natives can't read or write, so after you leave, we just shut it down." And boy, would I like to have met Charles. And they lived, oddly enough, number 44 River Road, in a house that was on the lane property coming down to the water. And I think, and I got to go back and check on it, that our famous captain, Oliver G. Lane's middle name was Griffin. Does that do anything for you? If you think the royal family of England is severely interbred and genetically confused, you never studied Annisquam. A handsome devil, wasn't he? And brave, and sounds like a very good man. And today, or yesterday, out of the work that Betsy Horowitz was doing in sorting through unsorted prints, next door comes this. This is General James Cunningham in retirement with his wife, Anne Lane Cunningham. He's almost as interesting as a stagecoach.
I'm doing the Charlotte Augusta Lane, her sister. So
Right.
her name's Annalisa.
Okay.
And I thought James Cunningham may have been the forerunner of the Cunninghams because this is an attorney family, but this James Cunningham she married, I think came from Pittsburgh. He was a farmer or something.
His family came from Lunenburg, Massachusetts, and what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is I'd be happy to answer questions if I possibly can when we finish, but I'm on a roll here, and I'm a little afraid that if I shake my head, all this stuff is going to fall out on the floor, and I won't be able to recover. So we know who James was, and the question is, who is Orrin? Orrin Edward. Born in Gloucester, he lived 56 River Road. This is the house down the hill that Ann Meyer rehabbed. Has the little small building out that was once upon a time a ladies' hairdressing salon.
Yeah.
But that building has a more history than you possibly know. The headquarters of the Chards and then Mr. Griffin was at 56, I think, but it might be 58, Leonard Street, where Mimi Davis, last name please.
Emmons.
Thank you. Mimi Davis, where the Emmonses live, which is a house that came along relative speaking late. And he is, in the next picture, the old geezer on the left. And he was the father of the last man to run the stage. And here we are. Orrin Griffin. Jonathan Dennison, who was a blacksmith at Chester Square. This was, apparently his nickname was Gampy Sargent. He ran the store at 44 Leonard Street, right out here on the corner. And this poor bewildered looking guy, who is significantly younger than anybody else in the picture, was named Chester Parsons. And I looked Chester Parsons up in the U.S. Census for this period, and he's listed as a salesman, groceries. He was the clerk in the Sargent store. So that's Chester Parsons. And if no, the Lymans aren't here. I think at one point he owned the house that the Lymans now live in. But there's our friend Orrin. How many people have seen pictures of people who were in the Federal Army in their reunions, the Grand Army of the Republic unions? This man looks like every single guy in those photographs. Neatly dressed, suit, vest, tie, beard. I haven't looked him up, and I could look him up, but I'll bet you 50 bananas to 50 cents that he was a Civil War vet. He just looks like it. And on the back, when you turn the picture over, it's annotated. So I've told you what I just told you, but that's where it came from. Now, their opposition was literally called the opposition. We had the Griffins running the coach, and someone said there's room for a business opportunity here. So they opened a competing stagecoach. And people here locally called it, with great imagination, the opposition. And they continued a little while after the Griffins gave up. And now for the news at 8 p.m. Is it possible to have a little light? Because riding around a stagecoach on Cape Ann sounds like it'd be a nice way to see the marshes and things. But it wasn't as straightforward. I may not be able to read these. It wasn't as straightforward. These are news items that came out of the Cape Ann Museum. On Saturday, Mr. Colby's Annisquam Coach overturned by the depot. 6 passengers inside, 3 on the outside. Laura Davis lost her wallet with $90. $90 in 1880 is a lot of money. Thorough search, not found. Searched again in Squam and found it. Great joy to all. One of the passengers riding on Harvey's coach was struck on the nose by a telegraph wire and knocked off when they took a shortcut out of the green. He is a man named Bowen from Bayview. I get a feeling from reading some of these news items that there wasn't a hell of a lot going on in terms of the newspapers. Levy Denon, stage man, is ill with rheumatism, Lanesville. The Lanesville coach upset twice going to town, called a hard passage. Lanesville coach taking the first trip Monday morning, full load of passengers, upset near the residence of Theodore Kimball, Squam, which I believe is the hip roof house across from the church, the beginning of Leonard Street. Road in bad condition, heavily loaded, so the runners on one side cut in and overturned the coach. Passengers made their way out from the weather side, and fortunately no one was injured. As the coach started again, it was passing down Riverdale Hill. It again took a lurch, and one of the horses was thrown down near the wall, which was nearly covered with snow. When the horse got up on its feet, it was discovered that one horse was on each side of the wall. The top part of the wall was removed, and the off horse was put on again on the track, and the coach proceeded. And there's a lot more like that. So it wasn't anywhere near as routine as taking the stage to the depot. You never ended up where you might end up. Now, because I tend to be overly complete and over-engineer everything, we can tell you what happened to the Colby stagecoach operation in Squam, where it was, and what happened to it. So if you're seated comfortably, I'll begin. Now, the question is, can people in this room see this snippet from the City Atlas of 1882? Here we are at Leonard Street, post office, schoolhouse. You might know something's missing here. No firehouse. And, of course, no Rogers Lane. But what we do have is Stuart Colby's operation, house, and barn. That's 1882. In 1889, something has happened. Stuart seems to be no longer with us, since it's his heirs that own the property. But Harvey, who you may remember, it's a quiz at the end of the period, Harvey bought out Stuart. So here is Charles Harvey and his operation right here. And oddly enough, 1889, we now have an engine house. So somewhere between 1882 and 1889, this engine house next door put its roller skates on and came up here and parked next to this building. And in the process, changed from number 6 to number 8, and I can't possibly explain that. But it's still interesting. So Harvey's grew to this area here. This is the intersection of Walnut and Leonard, and that's Harvey's Emporium. And by 1917, there's a new building, the one that Ross Lane used to operate out of, with metal stucco-clad building. That little office on the corner, and underneath, and I'll bet it's still there, is a 250-gallon gasoline tank. And whoever just bought that property better make damn sure that tank isn't still there, because I'll bet it is. And this is the building that collapsed under the snow of last year. And there is what undoubtedly was the Stagecoach office if you happen to go from here. And all these companies had a headquarters in Gloucester, because that's where a lot of people had to go from here to there. You just couldn't go from here to nowhere. You had to go somewhere. So you can look them up in the city atlas, city directories, and you can find out where they operated. This building here, which is still there, I believe is the building shown on that plot plan. I will tell you that my sister had a Gale friend who kept a horse in that building. Does that ring any bells, Mr. Gale?
Last horse stable at Annisquam.
Do you remember horses being in there?
I don't remember the horse's name, no.
I think the horse's name was Griffin. But it might have been Harvey.
It did belong to my sister Joan.
Yes. And she hired the horse out to people like my sister, who then fell off more or less continuously onto the pavement of Annisquam and somehow lived to tell the tale. So there really were horses in that building even after they closed it up as a Stagecoach headquarters. Now this is a little more interesting, and it's a good example of how you can't believe what you read in spite of the best intentions of what people are trying to do. Cape Ann Museum was very kind, and they went and pulled all kinds of stuff for me about the Stagecoach. And they came up with what I thought was the pot of gold. And it's labeled as Stagecoach Headquarters, 58 Leonard Street. And you'll see it in a minute. Here we are. Here's the bridge. I'm going to use the arrow here because this is the bridge. And for those at the back of the room, very hard. This is thick with chards. Here is Chester Square. There's the Ezekiel and William Chard House. There's the Ezekiel and William Chard Post Office. There is the Ezekiel and William Chard Stables. And this is Chard Wharf. And this is Ezekiel and William Chard's Wharf. I mean, you couldn't go very far without tripping over a chard. This is the double house, nickname for reasons that nobody has been ever able to explain to me, is the old castle. So the Stagecoach headquarters was more or less diagonally across the street from the old castle. And when you look through the old pictures of this area, that building, because it's unusual construction, is a very good marker to try to figure out where the hell you are. So, this came out of the negatives. The stone chair is there, Chester Square, and there's four buildings put together. 1, 2, 3, and a little building. Remember the little building where the ladies were having their hair done?
Yeah.
You watch. So I wasn't sure whether I was right or wrong, but being complete, we got a helicopter up in 1885. Here's an aerial view. This is the so-called old castle, and there is the tripartite barn across the street. And from up above, looking down, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus a little building full of ladies having, no. This, however, is a conundrum, because with the very best of intentions, the Cape Ann Museum presented to me, which I thought was the find of the month, photograph of the stage headquarters at 58 Leonard Street, and it's plainly a very different building. I have no idea where this building is. I kept trying to bend the building to fit my preconceived notions, and it wouldn't bend. Look at the big ventilators up on top. It's just the wrong building. However, right in front of it is a Stagecoach with western windows. So there's a prize for anybody who can tell me where this damn building is, because it's plainly related to our Stagecoach, but I don't know. So here we are in 1882, Leonard Street, Chester Square, charts everywhere, and that building with X on it was the stables. And the city atlas is used an X over a building to tell the fire department this was an unoccupied building, not a human residence. So that's 1882. Now, you got 4 buildings there, remember? Stagecoach is out of business. One building goes down Leonard Street and up the hill to become the barn who's lived in by, somebody help me out, because the family still lives there, and they call it the barn. It's up in the back of Chester Square. That sounds right to me, yep. That's right. So the Lorden's barn was part of Orrin Griffin's stagecoach operation, and they just popped the building up and moved it down the hill and up the hill. Now, remember the ladies? Here we go. That's the ticket office for Orrin Griffin's stagecoach operation, migrated down to River Road or Curve Street, depending what you want to call it.
Annie Young's hairdresser.
Was that what it was?
She was Gertrude's sister, Gertrude Griffin's sister.
Right. Well, I remember the ladies in those things that look like space shuttles, or stuck down over their head, sucking out all their brain strength.
Yeah.
That was the ticket office. If you think people around here ever throw anything away, they don't. Ask my daughter. So what killed our stagecoach lines? Well, the obvious thing that killed it was the electric tram cars, which began as horse cars, and I'm guessing that the corporate decision-making was, let's begin by putting down the tracks and get some revenue by pulling the cars with a horse until we get the wires in, and then we'll bring the cars in. So the horse-drawn car is 1885, and the first electric car arrived at the other side of the bridge in late 1890. And if you think about it, that was a kiss of the death for a stagecoach. Why are you going to get in a smelly, fly-ridden, antique vehicle when you can walk across the bridge and hop on an electric tram and go to Gloucester? So, except for taking, tourists or things around and sightseeing things, there wasn't much of a role for stagecoaches anymore. I think I would have, when you look carefully inside that stagecoach, I think I've been more comfortable in the stagecoach than on one of these things. So, there is a great dearth of photographs of stagecoaches. I don't understand it. Everything around here has been photographed to the last possible degree. And there are only a handful of pictures of the stagecoaches, and I don't get it. This popped out of a box of previously unscanned glass plate negatives that were in storage next door. And what do we have? We got 3 stagecoaches, or 2.5 anyway. And this one is ours, I'm sure, because of the configuration. Remember the windows? Because of our windows. There's another one behind it, and something which looked like you would have hired it for funerals or weddings, plus a delivery wagon. I have no idea where this picture was taken, and as much as I've looked at it, I have not been able to figure out where it was taken. And we were very lucky that all of these stagecoaches didn't come to naught. This is a very nice painting, which is in the Milwaukee Art Museum, for those of you who can't read in the back of the room, by Eastman Johnson, who I do not know, of kids playing on the body of an abandoned stagecoach. And you could remove the body by removing about 6 bolts. So you could hoist the body up in the air in a barn, pull the running gear out from underneath, and use the running gear for something else, a wagon or whatever else. And to leave the body just rotting away like this makes perfect sense. And my guess is this painter saw exactly this somewhere. So, we didn't lose it. There's a bit of a lost period between that stagecoaches and retirement in 1923, for which some reason, maybe somebody in this room can explain it to me. Gloucester has had 2 anniversaries of its founding, ranging between 1623 and 1642, which gives them an excuse to have a party every 2 or 3 or 400 years, but separated by 19 years. So the stagecoach was brought out to commemorate Gloucester's 300th anniversary in 1923. And thanks to my eagle-eyed wife, who looked in our bookcase and found a little collection of printed calendars that we published in the middle 90s. So this picture, no, yes, this picture. And underneath it are the people on the coach. And guess who is seated in the middle on the box? Anybody want to guess? It's a girl. Gert Griffin. You got it in the back of the room. And that's her father. That's her aunt. And this is a girl named Davidson, who, if you read Gert Griffin's memoirs in that book, Peaceful Harbor, was one of her best friends. So they got to ride around on the stagecoach. I know, he looks to me like he's drunk. But I think what he's doing is he's got his foot on the brake handle. So I think he's pushing down hard on the brake handle. The horses don't look to me like they're trying to get away. But I don't think he's going to fall off the coach. And this was an aunt up here with a parasol. Same group of people, probably the same day. And I want to point out a couple of things that become important when we decide what to do about the coach. See this sort of handmade sign up here that says Annisquam? There's nothing here. It's just blank. And it says O.E. Griffin over the door. Keeping in mind that the last owner of the stagecoach was James E. Griffin, and if you go in the building next door, there's James E. Griffin's order box on the wall. So this was faked up in 1923, the signage. Probably by his son, so I give him a pass. How did we get it? Gert Griffin writes that the coach moved in along with lots of other stuff when the fire department moved out. Fire department didn't cede ownership of that building till the 1950s, but I guess they let us have it anyway. However, in the meantime, another keen-eyed observer who happens to be sitting about 3 feet from me, yes, you, found this for us, and I'll read a little bit of it. Waiting for the Mail is the title of the pen drawing made by Professor Charles Frederick Bradley. It's Ann Meyer's grandfather. Having built his home on Adams Hill, he became active in many substantial developments of the village. Now, this is for Steve Harris. As the president of the Village Hall Association for 26 years. You see, Steve? Yes. There's no way out. He made enduring interest in Annisquam and aided in the preservation of the stagecoach. So a group of interested people got together and they bought the stagecoach from the Griffins, I assume, to get it in. And he made a very nice pen and ink drawing, which some of you have seen before because it's been used on letterheads and a variety of other things. But if you look carefully at the stagecoach here, it's exactly the photograph, complete with the lady on top with a parasol. So he used it as a reference point for his painting, so that helps us a little. We don't know who the other people were that helped with the purchase, and we don't know what year it was purchased. Stagecoach came out again in 1973, and guess who's sitting in it? Gert Griffin and Molly Andrew. How the hell did they do this? And there are some snapshots. And what they did was they rolled the stagecoach out the door, they rolled it up onto a flatbed trailer, chained it down to the flatbed trailer, and drove the flatbed trailer through the city of Gloucester as part of the parade. Since they didn't trust the stagecoach not to fall apart, and they didn't have a couple of nice gentle horses and somebody they would trust, it is an option. If we ever want to move the stagecoach for a display or anything else, you could move it on a flatbed trailer. It's not a silly idea. But this was just a color snapshot lost in the stuff across the street, and I was pretty pleased to find it. So, our good friends from New Hampshire gave us some idea of what the condition. They believe that the interior upholstery is original, which is pretty stunning if you think about it. It's 170 years old. I know that somebody probably has a 170-year-old settee from their grandmother upstairs in a bedroom here, but that's a long time for fabric to last. The running gear, which is the part under the coach body, where you can lift the body off and they said is extremely good condition, appears to be original and untouched. Coach body has minor repairs. The signage on the sides is not original, and we just, again, have to decide, what do you do with something? Do you remove signs that were put on that are inappropriate because they're part of the history? Do you make it go back to the shiny, bright red, gilded animal that came out of Concord, New Hampshire? Do you leave it as it is because it's part of the history? I don't know any of these answers, but they're good questions. You remember that picture I showed you in 1923? Nothing, come on. Nothing over the top. This was painted on by somebody at some point. It's the wrong typeface. If you really want to get down to detail, there was something called the Concord block typeface. And if the lettering was put on in the factory in Concord, it had a characteristic typeface. This is almost Concord block, but it isn't. Back of the Stagecoach, that's Concord block. So somewhere along the line, somebody put new signage on. The other thing is somebody painted the damn thing yellow. This used to be a red coach. Why would you paint it yellow? I don't know. My guess is that sitting out in the Annisquam sun for a very long time, it might have been kind of tired looking. And someone maybe decided that yellow and black look better than red, and I don't know. But it's got a very loose wash of what I think might be shellac over the red. If you start looking, the red comes through everywhere. Interior photograph showing you how elaborate the fabric was. Little side windows, but you can see the edging and the interior wood is red. This is the running gear. And you remember I mentioned the belting suspension. This is what made the Concord coach unique, or almost, you can't be almost unique. Let's call it unique. And it was, I realized finally that it was the companies that made the belting in the mills, where they transferred water power or steam power to the machinery on the floor, the big, long, very long leather belts. This was perfect material to make the suspension. Incredibly tough and already being manufactured. But look at the painting on the running gear. This is all picked out in yellow and black. This is Peter. He's a very good man, but if you look over his shoulder, you can see the red original color. You can see it here, and you can see this sort of loose yellow wash. What should we do with it? I don't know. We should treasure it. That's as much as I know. But we have to have a community discussion as to how we use it. Do we just sit in there as it is? Do we pull it out on a flatbed trailer once in a while? Do we try to find funds to restore it? I mean, I'm the kind of person that likes to see things as they really look like. You imagine that coach, bright shiny red with gold leaf and all kinds of fancy stuff, but I don't think we should probably do that. And I think I think I've pretty well covered that, but I put the slide in to make sure that there were a few people still awake. In the search around, we found a few other stagecoaches. We believe this is the coach on Main Street, the Rogers Block in Gloucester. And I'm guessing that every single passenger in that stagecoach climbed up on the top to pose for the picture because there's nobody inside. Why would you climb up here in an incredible hoop skirt dress if you could ride comfortably in here? This is another mystery one, and again, most people have climbed out, although this joker here looks a lot like the guy in the coach in 1923, but I think there were a great many gentlemen with that kind of beard style, so I'm not going to put much attention onto it. But you'll notice the guy up on top with the parasol. They got a lot of people on these coaches, and you can see why they tipped over. Go around the corner by the church, whoops. This picture was the only one we've found so far of the Lanesville Coach Company. And this is the corner of Leonard and Bridgewater. And somebody astute looked at this and said this was a posed photograph because there's only one horse. And everybody's standing up there. He's got the mail bag with a padlock on it. See the fancy painting on the door? This is the only person that didn't cooperate. And one of the most prolific photographers that we have here that people haven't learned a great deal about was Thomas Clark. This is a photograph that he took on Rogers Street in 1882, and this is a shiny new coach. It has the Eastern type windows, big panes of glass. Don't know what happened to it. But my favorite stagecoach, of course, is John Wayne's stagecoach. And just a little bit of a pitch for the Navajo Nation. If any of you have a chance to visit Monument Valley, which John Ford used extensively for his Western movies, it's worth a detour. And his introduction of Hollywood into Monument Valley with the help of the Navajo Nation really saved them from desperate circumstances. They still think enormously highly of John Ford. And this is John Ford Point, Monument Valley. You put a couple of dollars in a box, and a guy rides a horse wearing a red shirt, rides out to pose for you. You take your pictures, he rides his horse back in. But it makes a much better picture to have a Navajo sitting on the pony there than nobody sitting on John Ford Point. So if you get a chance to go there, it's not that far from Las Vegas, it's worth a detour. I'd like to finish, because I think a few people are probably not still with me, by Norman Rockwell painting of the Christmas coach. And this seems to me as good a way as any to wish you all a Merry Christmas. And thank you for sitting through this.